This might just be the most beautiful machine that we've had in the cave to date. Hello cave dwellers, this is the Sharp X68000 Expert, a beautiful dual tower design there with a handle in the top. I absolutely love that. And today we're going to be exploring it because this is mine. We've seen a Sharp X68000 on the show before. A couple of years back we had the Pro, the desktop model. Long-time viewers will remember that. We had a live show with it as well. And that was on loan so that we could explore the story of the X68000. And there's a link in the video description so you can go back and watch that if you want. So what are we doing with this one today? Well, this came to me with the help of Gary. Thank you so much, Gary, for fixing me up with this. I really do appreciate it. And of course, it has to be shared on the exhibition, which I'm setting up here in the cave for public consumption. There'll be many people who have never got the chance to explore this machine outside of emulation, and I'm determined to get it set up for them. But it doesn't come without its challenges. How do you make a machine that was sold exclusively in Japan and all of the foibles that come with a Japanese machine to work here in the UK? Well, we'll be exploring that, but first of all, we'll start with the unboxing because it did come with its original box.
RMC is supported by MonsterJoysticks.com. Level up your retro gaming with their joysticks featuring genuine Sanwa arcade parts. And OneClickPrint.com for your photos on canvas, acrylic, gifts and more. Local craftsmen and global delivery.
Here it is when I unpacked it yesterday. The box there on the table, a display piece all by itself. I love that we've got that. Now what we've got here is the Expert model, one of about 19 different models and variants of the X68000 in the range. The Expert came out in March of 1989 alongside the Expert HD, which had a hard drive as the name implies. The first model in the range was simply called the X68000 and that appeared in 1987 and the Expert appeared in 89. But as you may well have guessed, the X68000 range is built around the Motorola 68000 processor or a Hitachi clone which runs at 10 MHz. Thankfully in the box the keyboard is here, so that's a great start for us. For the keyboard geeks, this should have Alps SKCL yellow switches in them, which have an LED recess in them, so you can actually light some of the keys up. And there's a game called Cotton which will make them flash in time to the music, so if we get a chance, hopefully we can demonstrate that later today. On the back of the keyboard we are missing the fold-out legs. They've been snapped or lost, no doubt, but the shape of the keyboard is such that I can't really see that being a problem. As we lift the keyboard out, we find this little box of discs here, or little folder of discs. And that's also a relief to see because I've got no hard drive in the machine, so I'm depending on these to make it boot into an operating system and be of any use whatsoever. These are original discs with the dust jackets and the labels on them, and they look like they've had very little use, but that of course is no guarantee of reliability. But look at that floppy goodness, they look lovely. Next in the box there's this power supply, and I know that's not the original, and we'll see why shortly because this has had some modifications done for it, so we'll just put that safely to one side for now. And there's also this cable in here which I don't think we'll need. This is designed to control certain functions of the monitor. There was also a remote control for the original monitor, but we don't have that monitor, so we'll just keep that safe in case we're lucky enough to ever come across one, but it'll be a slim chance of that ever happening. Let's lift the polys inside to reveal what's hiding in the next layer, and being careful not to lose some of the loose screws that are sitting on them because I suspect we'll need those. And the completeness of what we've got in the box here continues with not one but 4 manuals, all of which I'm lacking the Japanese language skills to comprehend, but they, like the discs, look to be in pristine condition. The operating system is called Human 68K, developed by Hudson Soft. There's no Microsoft MS-DOS in here, thank you very much. And so we have a manual for that OS, as well as a hardware manual, which actually does have the ports labelled in English, as does the system itself on the back. So that is more useful than I was expecting to find. And then there's this page here, which I'm guessing tells us that if we have problems, Sharp will welcome us with open arms and will hug it out until the machine is repaired or something. The 80s were a wild time. There's also a basic manual and a software manual to complete the set. And then the last thing to take out of the box is the system itself. It's a machine that I've admired in magazines and photos before, but only now can I fully appreciate the design from all angles. It's a wonderful machine, and it wouldn't look out of place if it was revealed as the next big games console in the modern day. Are my tastes outdated, or am I right there? I think it really does look that good and still that modern in the present day. So what features does this machine bring to us? Well, on the front we've got two 5¼ inch floppy disk drives. They've got a mechanical eject button, and hopefully they still work and the disks will pop in and out. We'll need to power it up to see if that's the case. Below that we've got a headphone socket and a joystick port which still had the dust cover on. Any joystick that you want to use will need to be an MSX compatible joystick using that DE9 port, of which I've got one plugged in here. Then there's a very purposeful looking orange power button, there's a volume dial, there is a built-in speaker somewhere inside this thing, we'll find it shortly. And there's the keyboard and the mouse ports, which also had their dust covers on. I've got the keyboard, but unfortunately there's no mouse in the box, so I won't be able to demonstrate that today. So the first thing you'll notice as we look around the back is a bunch of cables hanging out, and this is where a modification has been made. What this is the Pico PSU, a conversion that's taken out the original PSU from the machine, so we've just got some empty holes there. And then there's a power brick that sits on the floor. It's quite a tidy modification actually, although it doesn't look that tidy right now. We've got two choices. We could encase it externally, or we could find space somewhere in there to tuck it away safely. And given the size of that PSU and the size of the Pico PSU, that should be quite an easy task. We'll get to that shortly. So let's tuck that out the way and we'll see what else we've got at the back here. Ports of interest on the rear for me include the analog RGB video output for our display. There's also a TV control port, which is only useful with the official monitor. And that was the purpose of that other cable that we found in the box that would connect to the official monitor. But there are the original dust caps once again on many ports. The TV control port, the stereoscopic port, which is used to connect a pair of stereoscopic glasses and get that perception of depth on certain games. And various other ports, including the joystick ports, the SCSI port, the image-in port. They all had dust covers on. This is in such pristine condition. It's fantastic. There are two very interesting ports on the back here though. One is the expansion FDD, or floppy disk drive, and the other is the hard disk port, which is SCSI. Well, it's not actually SCSI, it's something called SASI. So it's compliant with the SCSI standard. It was just very, very early on, so we can use a SCSI drive with it. Now, what can we get out of these? If I was using, for example, a Gotek, could I use the external floppy drive port? Well, yes, you can, but it requires a lot of modification to get the external floppy drive working as the primary floppy drive. It's not that simple a modification. And actually, I really like the built-in 5¼ inch drives with their mechanized eject button. And just the whole, it's almost like putting a vinyl record on, isn't it? Putting a big old 5¼ inch floppy disk into the front of this thing. So if that works, then we're just going to stick with that. I'm not going to Gotek it. However, I am going to make full use of the hard disk port. Now, if you watched my CDTV Trash to Treasure series, you'll remember that I made an external SCSI box and I put a SCSI to SD in there, so a SD card converter that acts as a SCSI hard drive, as well as the Gotek, but we don't worry about that. So I think as an experiment, we'll use that very same box from the CDTV, we'll plug it in and we'll see if we can get an external hard drive working. And if we can, we'll come up with its own permanent solution in the longer term, just like the CDTV has, and that will give everyone access to all sorts of games. And one last thing to point out here is that despite the fairly diminutive nature of the tower, there are two I/O slots, 1 and 2, so there is room for expansion cards to be installed. While this has a reputation for being a fantastic games machine because it was the very platform on which many of those old Capcom and other Japanese great games were created on, it is still very much a workstation computer. It is a PC that just happens to be brilliant at playing games. So that's why we've got these I/O slots here. The big question though is, does it work? And there's a lot to do, because the really interesting thing about the video output on this is that it outputs in 15, 24 and 31 kilohertz. So you need a multi-sync monitor like the original monitor to get an image out of it, or some kind of way of adapting that output. So that's where we're going to start with. Does it power up? And can we get an image out of it? And then we'll go from there. Let's get it powered up on the bench.
Ordinarily, this is where we perform some pre-flight tests to make sure that it's safe to turn on. But this is an unusual arrival in that the power supply has been recently replaced, and I'm told that it powers up safely, so don't think me too hasty for just plugging it in here. I'm assured it works, so in goes the power. Video, on the other hand, is a different matter owing to the range of output frequencies that come out of this machine. To tackle that, I'm using the OSSC, a line doubler that will take the inputs and spit them out to display modes that we can use on a modern display, or the most commonly found CRT monitors which accept a 31 kHz scan rate and higher. And getting that set up wasn't quite as easy as I'd anticipated. I've got hold of a DB15 to SCART cable. That would take the signal from the Sharp and put it into the OSSC, and it's quite easily available as a readily made up cable, specifically for the X68000. So I grabbed a display to test it out with, and then I powered it up for testing with this cable. Initially, things looked good. The machine has no hard disk, so it's prompting us to insert a floppy disk to boot here, and of course we had those in the box, so let's slot them in. And the first disk drive is good, which is a huge relief. It boots up into the human OS, but I can immediately see a problem with the image. There's this ghost-like banding across the screen, which I'm just unable to get rid of no matter how often I change the settings on the OSSC. There's just something not right here, and I suspected the cable. So I had a rummage through my spares to see what I had, and I made up a new cable. This new one has the DE15 SVGA plug at one end. This is a handy little connector that lets you quickly screw cables down into it without breaking out the soldering iron, which makes it great for a quick test, but it's not especially well shielded, so we might get some noise on it despite my makeshift copper shielding around the inside. It does help, trust me. And I'll include the links to the wiring diagram in the video description so you can make your own. Now let's test this out. And that's good. There is some noise if you look up close, so I want to look out for a nice shielded cable in the longer term, but it proves that the SCART cable just wasn't suitable for putting through the OSSC with this machine. So a good lesson learned there, and we can continue testing. Now a flat panel, that's all well and good for testing, but we need a CRT if we're going to give visitors the full X68000 experience. So here's another black gateway CRT just like the one that we used in the Mr. Build series. It's new old stock, and I loved it so much that I bought a second one from the same eBay seller. And this time I used the game Twin B from Floppy Disk, which is a 2-disc game, so that proves that both of our disk drives are working, and also their eject mechanisms are working fine. This machine is being incredibly well behaved so far. I did however notice that there is a chunk of the screen being chopped off at the bottom, and I wanted to try and fix that. You can see the white boxes being chopped along the bottom of the screen there. After some head scratching, I found that the solution was to go into the sampling options of the OSSC, then advanced timing on the 640 by 512 resolution in this case, and increasing the vertical back porch setting. I took that up to 35, and our missing pixels magically appeared on the screen, so we're not missing out on any of the action now. We're in a great place now, a good display, a working disk drive, and I dug out an MSX compatible joystick, which is absolutely awful to use, but it works. Next on my shopping list is a Monster Joysticks MSX adapter so I can use my Monster stick with it, but this works for testing and also inducing a huge amount of RSI. My thumb is in agony using this thing. As fun as this is, my very limited selection of floppy games won't give the people a great deal of choice, so it's time to get that hard disk working if we can. To try and get the hard drive working, I've taken an SD card. I've written to it a hard disk image with a selection of games on it using a program called WinImage. The file system won't be readable on your modern computer, so once that's written, we just have to trust that it's ready to go. The SCSI to SD adapter, which I'm using to fool the X68000 into thinking the SD card is a SCSI hard disk, that needs some tweaks to make it work. Namely, setting the SCSI ID to 3 for it to work externally, and the sector size has to be modified here to work with the image that we wrote to the card. So we just make those quick changes and then write them back to the SCSI to SD device. And things have been going so smoothly today that I just expected to be able to plug it in and start gaming. but sadly it wasn't quite that simple. You can't just plug it in and expect it to boot from the hard disk. And that's where this handy master boot floppy comes in. If I lose this, I'm in trouble, so I will take a backup of it. What this does is it allows us to install the SCSI bootloader. Yes, a SCSI bootloader for a SCSI machine. And then we tell the machine to use that bootloader. There's no BIOS as such to update the settings on it. We use a program called Switch, which is also on the floppy disk, and then I can update all of those settings, tell it to boot from the SCSI bootloader, and tell the machine that it has 2 megabytes of RAM, which was standard for the Expert model. It doesn't automatically detect how much RAM it has, and I have to specifically tell it. And with that, we can reboot and cross our fingers. And sure enough, we're now booting from the SD card, which is fantastic. I can explore a whole library of games, or at least the games that need up to and including 2 megabytes of RAM. We need more for some titles, but that's a project for another day. And there's loads more than the few that I had on floppy here, and that means that we've got a really great setup for people to come and enjoy, get a real feel for the machine, and try out a machine that they likely haven't seen before, let alone experienced, in a way that they'll have very little opportunity to do anywhere else. When I could drag myself away from the gaming, it was time to tidy up the Pico PSU. So I popped one side off, this the lesser populated side of the machine containing the floppy drives and the hard drive connector and the speaker here, which pumps music into the gap in the middle of the two halves of the machine, so now we know where that sound's coming from. As expected, there's plenty of room where the Japanese PSU used to live, and I think, given that there's nothing to really bash into or obstruct or short out on, and all the heat will be generated in the external power brick, we'll go for a nice simple tidy up. The Pico PSU goes into an anti-static bag, which I'll secure with a cable tie, and then the power input cable can pop out the bag and nearly, so very nearly, fits perfectly into an existing hole in the case. It just needs something slightly larger than the original washer to make sure that it doesn't pop back through the case. That's tightly secured while still being careful not to over-tighten it and damage the plastic. That's so much neater now, and I can get back to some Atomic Robo Kid. I then took a break for a cup of tea, and when I came back, the system had gone into standby, as indicated by those lovely light-up keycaps blinking away. What a nice touch.
Well, it's certainly proven to be a very interesting test drive today. These machines feel so alien, especially these Japanese machines that don't even present an operating system in a language that you understand. And yet, with a bit of perseverance and a bit of help from your friends, thank you to Gary and to Chrissy and to everyone else who gave me their input, other owners of the X68000, we managed to get this going, and I feel a lot more comfortable and a lot more familiar with it. And I feel much happier putting it on the exhibition space with that Pico PSU tucked away and with the hard drive so people can really enjoy some games on it. As soon as we get that space set up through our monthly DIY episodes, you'll see it in situ, and hopefully we can share it a lot more with you. I hope you've enjoyed figuring it all out with me today, and if you've got one yourself, do check out the video notes because I've put as much as I can in there to help you out and to get over all of the hurdles in getting this to behave. As always, thank you for taking the time to watch. I hope you've enjoyed it, and see you next time. Bye-bye.